Okay, guys, so you guys are going to have to bear with me because I think my internet is bad. Is my internet still bad? Kind of. Okay, so, well, I'd like to welcome you guys to the webinar for today. And I promise you guys, I am going to start getting these out early. I think I say this for every event that NavalX does and put it all on me. Like I'm a last minute person, but yes, I have been playing this for a while. So I hope you guys do get a really good program here. I just wanted to actually start this a little bit differently. So I want to have a lot of high engagement. I would love to have you guys put in the chat where you guys are from, anything about like what your organizations are doing around the topics, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But also I'd like to engage and talk with you guys. So if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer function so I can ask our speakers. And I kind of want to get to it. So the reason that I'm having this is back in February, a lot of people were doing diversity and inclusion type events for Black History Month. And I wanted to do something, but also recognizing that it represented the Department of Defense and also wanting some really amazing speakers. I didn't want to rush anything. And hey, this topic is going to be around and amazing forever, right? So the reasons why I'm passionate is like, yes, I'm a Black woman, but I also represent so much more. And I know a lot of times people think of the diversity and inclusion aspect based off of how you look, but we know that if it's like the tip of the iceberg, and because we only have an hour, I hope we get some amazing resources in the chat. I hope we get some great connections made in the chat. And the biggest thing is like having friends with all different types of races and family that has different types of disabilities. We want to bring the highlights from this conversation to be, what can you guys take away to your organizations? And I see you guys, you got different shipyards around, all the different syscoms. And so I wanted to partner with academia, industry, and government to show that we all play well together, right? But what can you guys take home? Because I know the Secretary of Defense and the CNO, they've all said, hey, this is important to us and we want to impact and change our organization. But a lot of the times is how do you do that? What do you do? Like, what can I do? What is my organization doing? How can I get involved in the conversations? And so I want to introduce my speakers. We have Dr. Shidale Seale. Now I've had conversations with her. She's amazing. She's actually like a professional in this. So she teaches and goes around and teaches the organizations like how to implement the change. Mr. Micheal Young, I got connected with him just a few weeks ago, but he is a part of an amazing organization that helps Asian Americans actually overcome discrimination in the workplace and all around. And if they can drop their links to their pages and their sites and stuff, they can go ahead and do that in the chat. And now my friends Ryan and Raj here, we actually were part of the 2020 class for TEDXDAU, and they had amazing speeches about how Ryan talked about being able to watch those, but he talked about the preparedness in his life, and Raj talked about love in the workplace, and we're definitely going to get there. So one of the things I wanted to open this conversation up with is most of the time when I've heard of diversity and inclusion, it was always DE&I. And then they threw another letter in there. They started calling it diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I had to look that up, saying, what was equity and why is this part of the conversation? And so I saw Dr. Seale had, she specializes in that. Dr. Seale, why did equity start becoming a thing? So equity is the equal and fair treatment. Why does that go so hand in hand with diversity and inclusion?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks so much for having me. This is a great opportunity, Ashley. Hello, everyone. Equity. Yeah, that's the newcomer. So equity really boils down to ensuring that all employees have the opportunities and the resources necessary to succeed in the workplace, while, which would mean addressing barriers, right, that have historically disenfranchised minoritized groups here in the US. So these would be things like equal access to education, housing, employment opportunities, things like that. So when we look at diversity and inclusion, which essentially is an iteration of previous equal employment opportunity implementations, we had to consider that in order for minoritized people to succeed in the workplace, it wasn't just enough to like bring them into the space, which, you know, of course is diversity, right? And it wasn't enough to ensure that they were participating in meetings and in events and all that, and the projects, which of course is inclusion. We discovered that there were distinct and often high stakes resources that weren't available to these groups based solely on, you know, their background, whether that be gender or socioeconomic status, ability, sexual orientation, or any other identity. And this by far, I mean, equity is by far one of the most intentional components of DE&I work, because you have to actually understand history. You have to understand legislation. You have to understand the societal norms as they relate to each group and be deliberate and courageous enough to address the barriers that you uncover. So that's really what equity is and why it was a necessary part of D&I work.
Thank you so much. And I love that you say that, like kind of like equal and fair opportunity and like, and just kind of how it was birthed. So like when I look at like this room, like I said, so in this, on the screen here, you know, you can see the visible diversity. You know, we have all of us come from different walks of life, but one of the things is like including that in the fair treatment. And Micheal, I wanted you to touch on one of the things I was, when I was looking your story up, I saw that when you were overseas and trying to find jobs, you had a lot of discrimination that actually kept you from getting those jobs. And so like, you know, you didn't have that equity where you were highly qualified and you were in the right place in the right time, but yet it did not, it didn't go your way. So, I mean, how did you birth the organization that you're a part of now?
Wow, yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for asking that. I think, is it okay if I provide a little bit of background before I jump into that, so that, you know, people understand what's going on with me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I signed my Army enlistment contract September 7th, 2001. And in 2000, so I became an Army reservist, and in 2003, I became a Foreign Service officer with the State Department. I served in Seoul, Korea, Kabul, Afghanistan, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, Islamabad, Pakistan, and did a tour in the Bureau of Counterterrorism back in DC. During my 10 years as a Foreign Service officer, I applied twice to serve in China. Now, mind you, the State Department recruited me because I speak fluent Mandarin. But on both those applications, the department, the Bureau of Diplomatic Security came back and denied me my assignments. And nothing was put in writing. It was just, I just heard through somebody who heard from somebody that it's because of what I look like. I don't have any relatives in China. I was born and raised here. I volunteered for the Army. I volunteered for these dangerous posts. I fought this all the way up the line to the secretary. This was back in 2012, 2013. I surveyed Asian Americans at the State Department, and at that time found about 20 other Asian American Foreign Service officers who also were not allowed to serve in their countries of presumed origin. Okay, these were Americans. Collected that data, sent it up the line, nothing happened. So I went to the Washington Post with the story, and I posted that link in the chat. As a community, us Asian Americans in the Foreign Service were waiting for the quote unquote act to fall. I mean, was I going to get fired? Was I going to get reprimanded? We heard nothing. So at that time, I decided to leave because there was no other recourse. I felt like I had served my country faithfully. I had done everything that I could, yet I was still being treated as less than equal. That was 8 years ago. Asian American Foreign Service officers continue to come to me with stories of discrimination. And if I may, I would like to share just real quick some data that the Asian American Foreign Affairs Association has collected just last year. So I'm out of the government now. It's been 8 years. And now in the State Department, AFA, which is the Asian American ERG group at the State Department, compiled this data. In a nutshell, they surveyed their membership, Asian Americans, and they found that 30% of those members are affected by assignment restrictions, meaning they're not allowed to work in their countries of presumed origin. of those members, percentage of members of China, Hong Kong, Taiwan heritage affected by assignment preclusions is 50%. So half of all Chinese Americans are affected by assignment restriction. Of those percentage affected by assignment restrictions, they were automatically notified by diplomatic security, which is great. And the percentage of members who received their adjudicative analysis who felt there were a bias is 70%. So the emotion as foreign service officers that we feel, 7 out of 10 of us feel like we're being unfairly targeted. 75% of those affected by assignment restrictions did not receive their analysis report, which means that DS, diplomatic security, tells us, oh, you can't serve, but 75% of the time it's not done in writing. So there's no way to appeal it, which is really, really difficult to deal with. And we also found that 41% felt that they were outright errors when they did receive the reports, that there were factual errors in it. I'm going to stop share on this, and there's one more that I want to share because it adds a visceral, emotional description of what it's like to go through this. And there's one story here. Sorry, wrong one. There's another story here that really hits me deep inside. Why is it doing that? My apologies here. Yeah, okay, it's not doing it right here. There was a West Point graduate, Chinese American, served in the Foreign Service, and he was also denied an assignment to I think it was China. This stuff continues to happen. I had not a young woman, excuse me. I had a Foreign Service officer call me. She was half Japanese, half Bangladeshi, spoke fluent Japanese, and was subsequently denied an assignment to Japan, which really boggles the mind because Japan is an ally. There's no counterintelligence threat there. Fortunately, there was an appeals process in the State Department to allow her to overturn that decision, but the fact that this even happened, to me, is mind-boggling. All this activity really brings us to AFN, the Asian American Federal Employees for Non-Discrimination. We set this up because what we discovered was a lot of AAPI folks in not only in diplomacy but also in DoD and in the IC are afraid to speak up for fear of retribution. And so AFN's purpose is we're here to receive those stories because we need those stories. We need the data to describe what's going on so that we can advise the federal government and the White House and all the agencies on how to approach this problem. It's becoming apparent that in the collective American subconscious, there is an anti-Asian bias, and it's expressing itself in very violent ways. Within the federal government, it's expressing itself in terms of unequal treatment. So the one thing I want to throw out is if what can you do in your office or in your bureau? If you have any Asian American colleagues who you know or you find out are being discriminated against, send them to us because we're collecting stories right now. We're doing it with the State Department. We've reached out to IC. We've reached out to folks in DoD as well. It's an uphill battle because people are scared. So anyway, that in a nutshell is AFN, my story, and how you can help and chime in. Thank you.
Thank you, Micheal. I love statistics. So I'm an engineer by trade. I love statistics. I love facts. I love charts. I love data. Give me the pie, the bar. Give me it all, right? And so I love that when you share those statistics because every single group out there that has an organization that you can get involved with, has stats to help, to show that, hey, there's a need, there's gaps, there's people hurting out. And one of the things that when I went back and listened to Ryan's TED Talk from last year, I'm going to kind of spin it.
You're cutting off a bit.
And like I didn't get a chance to connect with you beforehand, but it's because I'm here. Am I back? Okay.
Sorry, you were cutting off for probably the last 30 seconds or so.
Oh, okay. Well, with Micheal, I love the fact, loving statistics and bars and data. One of the things that I'm so passionate about is like finding out about that data, those statistics, because they're important to recognize where people are hurting, where there's gaps, where there's need, where there's opportunity. And Ryan, when I went back and listened to your TED Talk, I loved it because it talked about three things: reading, exploring, and networking. And so I love those points. Can you go into a little bit about when you say, when you're reading and exploring different articles, you're experimenting and pushing boundaries, and then your networking aspect? Because I know that I think at one point you were even having virtual coffee dates with people on Fridays, right? Was that?
Yeah, Fridays with strangers. Yeah, no, absolutely, right. And I'll try to make it holistic and talk to obviously the subject of today's call as well. The premise is not anything outrageous, is not anything that, oh my gosh, I can't believe Ryan thought of that, give him the next Nobel Peace Prize, right? Is nothing like that. It was just this idea from how I started my childhood to preparing and working. It sounds hard to say, but like working hard. I end up having a job from my father, saving a bunch of money. And the story goes that when I was 15, I bought a bright red Camaro and I felt like I was the coolest kid on the block. But I couldn't even drive it yet because I wasn't going to have my license for another year. Right. And so it helped me realize that when I did turn 16, I was good to go, right? I could drive. And so for me, that was kind of a moment where I realized, wow, if I really spend time up front and research and do the reading, do all the exploring, understand what's going on around me, understand my environment, understand how I fit into the picture, that'll set me up for when there's an opportunity to do something later to be successful, right? And so, for the purposes of today's conversation, right, there's, I know we're all going to agree here, but there's obviously no place for discrimination in the workplace. But take that a step further. There's no place for discrimination in life, right? We're just humans interacting with each other, and to me, that's where I try to, have that balance of like work and life, and have that conversation in my head. But to me, it's just we're a bunch of humans talking to each other. We're better when we're together, and you try to put the mission part to it, the work part. And for me, the idea of DE&I is just, it's perspective, right? It's that everyone comes to the table with a different perspective. For the ones that are more, used to being talked about, it's race, it's ethnicity, it's financial class, those types of things. But from a work perspective, in my role, what I think about, it's everything. It's your life experiences, it's how you grew up, and when everyone comes to some sort of work project that you're working on, mission focused, whatever it is, and you bring all of those different perspectives, that's how you're ultimately going to be, more successful as a team. So for me, it really just comes down to perspective and trying to bring all those different perspectives together.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's the biggest thing. And that's why we're here. That's why so many organizations have made this a point, because I've been in many conversations lately about the diversity inclusion councils being stood up, ERG groups that may not have been there, a lot of different support things. And that seems to be the common thread, is that common understanding, trying to get to know each other. So here's the thing, guys, if you're in a room with all Black people and you're Black, that's a problem, because you're not going to be able to get someone else's perspective. And one of the things is when you try to incorporate, whatever you are, whatever you identify with, however you even what your passions are, if you're not putting yourself in the room to experience more, to learn more, to advantage. And that's why I really feel that a lot of organizations, once you can start to tap into that, it really where it makes the difference. And another thing too is, so we talked about the diversity piece, the equity, the fair treatment. So from Dr. Seale and Micheal, like talking about like that fair treatment and the balance and counteracting of discrimination, to networking and understanding. Well, and then the inclusive part, Raj, I want to, am I lost again?
No, we can hear you.
Sorry, I saw connection unstable. So I want to make sure I'm patient with my internet. So, but Raj, I love the fact that when you created your company, you realized that there was a missing piece, that missing piece of that deeper connection and building relationships. Because yeah, you can hit the numbers game, you can raise the stats where you've got numbers across the board, you can start putting people in the same room. But hey, if they don't have a voice, if you're not actually listening and bringing them into the conversations, then you're falling short. So Raj, in your TED Talk, you talked about bringing love into the workplace and how you showed love and how you actually had a part of your company invested into that. Can you speak a little bit about how you were able to incorporate that at your company?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Ashley, and thanks for having me on this panel. And this is an important topic, and we need to do more of these for sure. I think, to me, it just started with even why I left my company and 17 years ago, left a larger firm to start a new one. It was just the core belief that everyone matters. And I get emotional about talking about this stuff, by the way. So if I do, whenever I talk about people, I don't know, it's just kind of a natural reaction for me. I really believe that, we are all placed here as equals, and everyone, has that equal shot, right? Equal potential, but, it's the environment within which we are that sometimes dictates. Sometimes some of us get lucky, right? And definitely requires a lot of hard work, et cetera, to succeed. But also there are other things that matter, right? Factors like luck, who you're with, right? What you learn from others, the environment that surrounds you. So I think to me, it starts with the core belief when I started, that each person has an enormous potential, and it's each of our responsibility as individuals, as human beings, as teammates, to really lift each person up and do our job in really helping each person succeed, no matter where they're from, right? What backgrounds they came from. I'm sure, like everyone on this panel and everyone in the audience, I don't know what color means. There is no color to me. It's all black and white at the end of the day. It's the same color, right? And so I think it starts with, so Ashley, it started with, and something that I think it's really important when you talk about diversity and inclusion, I think it needs to be built into the culture at the very core belief system, right? And everything you do outside of any, processes and things that you set up and press releases and systems you announce about, what you're going to do about diversity and inclusion, it needs to start with the core belief system. I think that's that's what I believe. I'm not an expert on the topic, but that, everyone needs to know that you really believe that every person is treated equal. Every person has the potential, and it's our responsibility to help them succeed. I'll just add a couple more things, and these might come up. I'll just leave them for now, Ashley. Two other things I know we did is, I think from a culture standpoint, it's really important is, making sure that empathy is at the center of teaching people from an emotional intelligence standpoint. Empathy is something that's really placed at the center, because look, each one of us has our experiences, no matter how well-meaning we may be. I may not know all the experiences you've gone through, Ashley, and I would be foolish to say I understand everything about you, right? And so I think, that humbleness is required, that humility, and two, the just the listening part, and being able to say, you know what, I don't get it. Maybe I don't understand whatever somebody's telling me. Maybe I don't understand all their experiences, but who am I to judge that? Who am I? Because I haven't lived their life. I haven't lived, whatever they've gone through, right? And so I think that's really, really important. And building an awareness about that, well, that's something also I think needs to be somewhat intentional in organizations. Be intentional about building awareness about these things, right? Because sometimes, again, it's not because somebody wants to do something or be foolish about something or hurt somebody's feelings, but they just aren't aware, right? And so some of us maybe are more like that, right, than others. And it's not because somebody's trying to hurt somebody. It's just maybe they're not as touchy-feely, maybe like me. I don't know, right? And so how can we teach people that? How can we make them aware? And then the last piece, so it's the core belief system. It's like this empathy and awareness. And the third thing I think we talked about in our, every organization I've been involved in, and some of the initiatives I'd love to talk about later is, is the systems that you put in and incentives. You do have to put the mechanical part. I do believe if you get the first two right, the third one isn't as important as critical. It's putting the systems and the incentives in place, right? Do you have a good recruiting system that always makes sure that, we're not just leaving it to chance that we're bringing in diverse candidates? We do actually have a way to kind of bring in a diversity of people. So I can talk more about that later, what we did, but those are the three things that I think, we did, and why but it was the core belief, starting with each person matters and each person has huge potential. I think we all need to believe that. And if we can all work together to really lift each person up, the world will be, I think a lot of our problems are solved,
Yeah, you dropped so many good nuggets. Where do I even start? And I do want to go because it kind of flows, and like I don't even know how these questions come out of my mind, but this whole thing just flows. Like I've been truly blessed to know that whenever I have these discussions, these seaside chats, the panelists, all the discussion just flows. So Dr. Seale, I'd love to ask you something that Raj touched on, kind of like that systematic structure, because in your teachings, you teach that here's the diversity strategic plan. And I'm pretty sure that most organizations follow this. 4 steps. 1, they set goals. Because like I am involved in different organizations and I see us doing this. So please, I need the help too. So step 1, they set a goal. Number 2, they develop a plan. Number 3, they implement that plan. And then 4, they measure that plan. And so you said that this method, although strategic, has been ineffective for various reasons. What are those reasons? Like, why doesn't that work when you're trying to change culture?
Well, yeah, it's this strategy falls prey to the culture and behavior and embedded beliefs and agendas. When we think about this structure that we put in place, we see this all the time with policies that they're in the they've been instituted to regulate societal or workplace interactions. Yet nothing changes. So much of it is because each of these strategic steps, like setting the goal, developing the plan, implementing all that kind of stuff, we aren't including the right people. For instance, in most organizations, we have the C-suite or the HR, handling each of these steps, or we have like an outside agency or a consulting firm or whatever, planning and implementing these initiatives. But institutional knowledge is key. It is the missing piece. So when you have your C-suite or your HR planning and implementing initiatives for the rest of the organization, who for the most part do not share similarities with the C-suite or HR, it's an imposition of the dominant will onto the less powerful without their consent. So essentially, I'm going to tell you what to do based on what I think needs to happen. And who wants that, right? Even if it's a great or noble idea or initiative, the people in the mailroom, the people in the cafeteria, or at the lowest pay scale they must absolutely have a say in the policies that affect them. And to be clear, the lion's share of policies in the workplace affect the non-administrative and like the less powerful strata. So what we do when we do these plans, when they're imposed upon us, is we resist, we rebel, we disengage. It's natural. And this is change management 101, organizational behavior 101. If you want buy-in, if you want engagement, you absolutely must include the voices of those who stand to be impacted and include them at every stage of your strategy. This is why we're finding that much of our workplace DE&I initiatives have been completely ineffective. People don't have a say in what's coming down the pike.
Raj, could you touch on that, maybe like from your organizational perspective? Because you said that like even you, there were things that you were able to implement that you've seen success from. Like what are some of those?
Yeah, I mean, for instance, right, I think I'll just talk about, again, we had, this is my consulting firm previously. I'm running a different firm now. But previously, I think, we saw, for instance, a couple of things that were issues. One was potentially, our recruiting schools and kind of we had put in place. It was never by design, but it just happened. We were recruiting from a number of schools, but then, we started getting people from certain schools that were kind of the top 5 schools in the country. You can name them, right? All kind of pedigree schools. And then what we found pretty soon, because the students were going back that came from there, they naturally gravitated and had met students from those schools before. So they went back to campus and they were able to attract more of them. And pretty soon we centered on one school, the number 1 school in the world, Wharton. And we had our recruiting. And it was great, first of all, that we were able to recruit as a small firm. That kind of was a testament to our talent model and our culture that people came to us. But it did, create a little bit of an issue that, again, amazing people, right? I want to kind of say that. And they turned down higher paying offers to come to us, so I think it was, what we did then is, we put some more intentionality. We said this was not by intent, right? It just happened and it kind of skirted this way. So we kind of looked at our talent strategy and said, okay, how do we change that? How do we become more inclusive in the schools that we're recruiting from, right? So make sure that, we're bringing in a lot more candidates. And also, is there an internal bias now built into our interview model that was true? Again, people looked at it very frankly and they were very candid about it. So I'm proud of them for that, right? And people said, is there some bias now built in? Because, we've kind of recruited from certain schools. And now every time we look for somebody from the outside, and it's a little bit different. So we were able to kind of correct for that, right? But it took some work. I won't say it didn't take work, because again, it wasn't because of the quality or the intent of people. I must say that. It was just that, we all have inherent biases, whether we believe them or not. They're built into our systems, right? And sometimes we have to kind of unlearn them or have somebody tell us, right, that you have those biases, right? And so I think that's what we tried to do, is build some more intention behind it and build some diversity behind the recruiting program from an internal standpoint, to make sure that there were different voices even from within our recruiting that could say, hey, you know what? We should consider not just this type of, even like, for instance, one quick example, Ashley, is our interview model, right? Our interview model was very complex, 7 interviews, case-based method, which is really complex and weeded out most people. And but we saw some issues with that, where we were potentially leaving out some good people, right? And so we had to go back and correct for that. There was a little bit of, I won't say tension with that, but we made the hard choices. So that's just one example, or a real example, that I wanted to point out. Hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah, no,
Can I pitch in just a little bit here on that? I think it's fascinating, Raj. It's fascinating that your group was so intentional and so reflective about finding these barriers. And this is exactly what we mean about equity. When we start talking about hiring, and we start talking about recruiting, our sourcing is the initial point of bias. It is the initial point of bias. And then we need to look at our hiring managers. What education do they have? What understanding do they have? And that process with the interviews, because if your 7 interviews might be a little, that might be a little challenging for some people. They need to get into that job now. I get it. But the reality is that what are your case studies referring to? Are they referring to things that could be exclusive? And thus, you're picking people out. I mean, when we looked at the SATs and, the question about the, I don't know if you ever heard about the question about the wallet, and they asked Black students and white students, if you're walking down the street and you saw a wallet on the ground, what would you do? And the white students said, I would pick it up and take it to, the police or whatever. And Black students said, leave it alone. I would not touch it, right? And this clearly identifies the difference between your background and how you would carry out certain acts. But the correct answer, as far as the SAT was concerned, is you would pick up the wallet and take it to the police. So thus, students of color who were raised a different way got that answer wrong. So we really need to look at how we are conducting these or even drafting these case studies and the biases that are within them. So that's an excellent point, Raj. Excellent.
I love it too. And actually, I kind of want to tie that, what you guys just talked about, to this question that we have. And Micheal, I'm going to direct the question to you because you are representing an organization that fights against discrimination, and to try to change, change the stats, right? What about within the DoD organization, there's deliberate efforts to maintain separate DE&I and EEO and EO groups. So like, what is your experience when doing collaboration events or anything with other types of organizations? Because there are other organizations that fight against LGBTQIA++ rights, against disability, against African American, Latino. There's so many organizations. Like, do you see benefit with partnering with others at times, or yes or no? I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's absolutely critical that we coordinate with all groups out there, whether they be, ethnic based or what have you. There's a lot of lessons we can be learning from each other. We are each other's allies, because at the end of the day, what's most important is that we as Americans live by the principles outlined in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution of the United States, specifically the 14th Amendment. Now, in the national security establishment, this is huge, because if we can't demonstrate that we're treating our fellow Americans equally, where we have less moral credibility to engage with our foreign partners and foreign interlocutors. It doesn't really help that, it doesn't help that we're pointing fingers at folks outside of our country when we're not getting it right internally here. So yeah, it is very important that we collaborate with other groups as well. My opinion. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Does any other panelists want to weigh in before I move? Yeah. So one of the things, like I've always said, like the collaboration, and I love. So one of my favorite things is the different types of heritage months or the disability months, because I love like going in and learning about like the other cultures. And I remember talking to one of my friends whose ethnic background is from El Salvador, and just like learning or unlearning some of the stereotypes that I had was a huge thing. And then like even going to, because like everybody would think like, oh, if you're of that certain ethnicity or background, you want to go to that program. That's usually what you will find the most in that group. But I love going to all of them because you're literally learning so much that you really may not have had that exposure to. So Ryan, I want to ask this a question to you. Have you seen any type of improvement in your work or at your office, like as you had these different networking opportunities and sharing stories and stuff? How has that been improving your workplace or your work or your surroundings?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I appreciate it. Yeah, so for me, I guess I'll share it this way. When COVID kind of took over our world, and then on top of that was the Black Lives Matter movement, and then on top of that, what did we have? Murder hornets, right? Like it was just like all these things kind of escalated on top of each other. And I remember waking up for work one day, and I was just I was in a funk. Like I didn't feel myself. I just didn't feel like I wanted to go to work, which was unusual for me because I really do like my job. And it was for the first time, I mean, me as a supervisor, as a leader, I started to feel like, well, if I feel like that, what do my employees feel like? And I had never really thought about it that way before. And if I'm having a bad day, Mr. Jolly Green Giant over here, if I'm having a bad day, they must have had bad days before. And I wish that I had, done something differently previously, but let's start now. And so you'd kind of hit on it, Ashley, when you asked me the first question. I didn't answer it at the time, but yeah, I mean, it's small, right? But I started these little Monday morning, we all get on. I have employees in 4 locations. So we all get on a Teams or whatever and just have coffee break. And the purpose is not to talk about work, right? It's anything but. It's how was the weekend? How's life? How's the family? Those kind of things. And I really do believe over the course of what's been a year, we now have a stronger team of 14 people than we've ever had before. And we don't see each other in person, which to me, I feel like is amazing. It's miraculous that we're able to sort of have these they say you build relationships in between meetings, right? And you sort of have these personal relationships that you start building, getting to know each other. Everyone knows all each other's children's names, all of that stuff, right? And that's when you start building the more personal side of the relationships in the office place. And it's become much more effective work environment as well. It's pushing, us to, hey, I think I can talk to this person because they do X, Y, and Z. And hey, go, ask him because I think he did that, ask her, right? And it's sort of, everyone started getting a better understanding of each other and what their backgrounds are and things they've experienced. And so I just think it's led to a much more positive work environment, culture, just to spend time, I'll say, dedicate time to stepping away from work, getting to know each other. It's really been a positive influence here.
So I love I love this conversation, and I want to kind of go this direction. So I don't want to get into for all the churchgoers out there, preaching to the choir, right? If you guys have heard this term, like, I feel like sometimes that the people that are most passionate about these topics, the ones that are most involved in expanding their thoughts, their biases, challenging their biases, they're usually always in the same room, right? We're usually in the same room in the same conversations. What about recommendations? Like, any of you panelists can answer this. What about recommendations for changing those like hearts and minds, or inspiring the change? Let me reframe this question. Inspiring the change in others around you when you're in the confines of work, because sometimes people don't have a safe workplace to be able to do this. So, pretty much the question is like, what are recommendations for inspiring that in others? Because again, we'll be in these same rooms and have these same conversations for people that are passionate, but how do we start affecting those that are not in the church?
I think I'm gonna let Raj take that one. I'm gonna hear you, and if you say what I think you're gonna say and what I agree with, then I'll defer. But if not, then I'll add on. Go ahead.
And one of the things I want to do after I'm kind of stopped working on public procurement and bringing buyers, suppliers together all over the world is I want to work, on a global mission to really kind of have open spaces for conversations, sort of like what Clubhouse is doing. So to your specific question, right? I think, I think what happens a lot of times, yes, I think it is about culture change, but then what do you do about culture change? How do you drive culture change, right? Because everybody can say that. I think practically speaking, what happens is, it might be controversial what I say, but I feel like we're too quick to judge and others, and others' intent, okay? Right, when somebody does something, we say, oh, this guy's racist, or this person's this and that, right? And I don't believe that. Yes, there are those people, absolutely there are, right? But I think there are a few, okay? But I think as soon as we start putting people in buckets and calling them, putting labels on them, we start to automatically create more division, right? Then we drive people apart further, right? So I think that the whole piece around, I do think a lot of people, most people believe a lot of, that people are equal. And again, we can agree or disagree on that, but the empathy awareness on all sides is really important, on all sides, okay? And I will stress that, right? Because I don't like, again, I'm gonna say something probably very controversial here, and I'll say it because, I personally don't like the term white privilege, okay? I hate that term because I hate labels, period, okay? I don't like putting labels on people. And because as soon as you do that, now we've judged somebody and we've said, well, because of some background you came from, you have certain things, et cetera, but you don't know where that person was. You don't know where that one came through. So I just personally detest labels to start with. And I think as soon as we start doing that, we cannot have culture change if the culture change starts with, hey, there's a bunch of people that need to be taught how to respect people. What if we started with, we think people already respect each other, but maybe they don't understand each other completely. They don't understand all sides. How do we create spaces like this one to really start to create conversations where we can start to understand each other better, right? And listen. I think there's a lot more of that required. So Ashley, I'm not sure if this answers, or I've kind of opened up a Pandora's box for myself, but I really am more about listening and trying to understand people where they come from before I start judging them and saying, hey, you're this or that, or why did you do this, right? And again, going back to my company's example really quick, yes, there were a number of white Americans in there, but they're the most absolutely awesome, amazing people. All these kids who took a pay cut to come to me, they could have gone to McKinsey, BCG, all these amazing firms and gotten paid a lot more money. They believed in public service, but we didn't have diversity. It wasn't by design. It just happened, right? And they themselves, I could have said, hey, you guys, you rich white kids, you came from here, these schools and pedigree families, and this is what's going on. Right? Again, I'm saying a lot of stuff. This is recorded, so. But you get my point, right? I think we worked together and we figured it out, right? And we knew we inherently believed in something. So I think if we're going to drive change, I think that's where it needs to drive. It needs to start with a culture change, but the culture change needs to start with more respect and listening and creating spaces. So let's get more people on the ship, like you're saying, Ashley, because there are more of those people, right? But they're not going to jump on board if we start labeling them.
And I think that's a key point. That's a very, very key point about the labeling. I agree wholeheartedly about the education of all of us about each other, because that's the only way that empathy can happen. I can't empathize with you if I don't know what you've been through, if I don't understand what your background is, if I don't understand the challenges that you've gone through. And so that in itself is the willingness, right? Because I can't educate you unless you're willing to be educated. Or you can't be educated if you're not willing to do it yourself, to go out there and seek that knowledge, which is absolutely vital in moving toward empathy. Empathy doesn't just happen. I think that what we must absolutely recognize is that when, for instance, Raj, like your company, when you said you have these amazing kids who came in and they were just passionate about doing this work, even though they come from very, very privileged backgrounds, it speaks volumes to really, really where the zeitgeist is right now with a lot of our Gen Zs, right? One of the things we have to acknowledge, though, is that people from other backgrounds who wouldn't necessarily have had that socioeconomic status, their kids would not have been able to have worked, for less pay or in less high-paying situations. So this is where when we start talking about privilege, and we don't have to assign a racial construct to it, all of us have privilege. All of us have privilege. We can call it dominant privilege. We can call it whatever. I mean, I'm from a country where everybody looks like me, so we have that privilege, right? But it's really an understanding that, yes, based on where you are, you have got privilege over somebody who is not where you are. I go back to Micheal's situation, where he was recounting how a lot of the Asian American service people were being restricted from certain positions. That was a lack of privilege, right? So we really do have to understand how the positionality of this, whatever we present ourselves as, places us. It places us in situations that would be more privileged or less privileged. And this is where that empathy comes in, because if I'm consistently in a more privileged situation based on my aesthetic, then I would definitely need to understand those who are going through situations or who literally experience life with more barriers than I do. So that's really where a lot of this is. We're not categorizing. This is a racialized country. This is a racialized society. So we have to be really open and honest about what's happening.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you guys, because there was a situation where I was taking a gun safety class, and the gentleman teaching the class was a 71-year-old white gentleman from the country. and he was teaching gun safety based off of his personal experiences. Well, 80% of the class were people of color. And I asked the question because I felt my emotions rising to where I said, how does this apply to people of color in that situation? He didn't understand the question, and I was mad. Other people in the class were mad. But at the end of the class, instead of writing my nasty gram, I walked up to him and earlier, why did you bring it up? And so I talked to him about a gentleman that was killed, a Black gentleman that was killed doing the exact same thing he was saying when he got pulled over. And I said, like, so I think that opportunity gave him a chance to learn about teaching the class in a way that benefited him. But then he understood. He's like, you know what? I want to look this guy up. And I told him other cases where safety, may not have applied, but what that, instead of letting my own anger drive that conversation or and rage, I've also heard of the term, I'll be a little bit, controversial, Raj, like you, where people say, oh, it's not my job to teach someone. Well, actually, it can be your job to teach someone if you take the opportunity and show the empathy. I said, hey, if he's 71 years old and he grew up in the country where the class was, I bet you he may not have had the exposure like I have, because that is a topic more passionate to me. And so, I mean, I love it. I love the conversation. And then just because I know, like I would like to get to some of the questions. I mean, this is fantastic conversation. Like I want the audience to understand, these conversations can go down so many different avenues, and there's so many different topics and speakers and conferences. So panelists, if you have an opportunity to in the chat, are there any people to follow on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram that are leading the conversations for diversity, equity, inclusion? So you guys can put them in the chat. Oh, yeah, Dr. Seale is too. Dr. Seale actually is a professor. Well, not a professor, she's a doctor and certified in teaching organizational change. But yeah, if you guys can drop in the chat.
Too. I am a professor.
Yeah, at UCSC.
Right, so I'm at UCSC. I'm the chair of their diversity, equity, and inclusion program for the extension school. I also have my own firm that does diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. So I'm also a thought leader on that. So please follow me. We can chat.
Yes, I love it, because I mean, a lot of times it's like, even having the resources, there's so much, but I mean, trusted resources from you guys is great. And so one of the things, so if one of you guys can touch on this, is the lack of pay equity in the Department of the Navy. But actually, that's the Department of the Navy, and you'll see that in society where different races might get paid less, or I know women do get paid less. And so what are some things to make progress in that area that organizations can do?
Raj, you want to jump on this one, or do you want me to hit it? I know as a consultant.
Ryan, where are you at?
Ryan,
I know Ryan is not
volunteering you, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, we've said it a few times here, right? But it's just treating people as people, and everyone should be at some point being pushed to be at some sort of level playing ground, if you will, from a starting point. It's all of our jobs on this conversation to make sure we get people to those places. And so, Ashley just said something to the effect of, it's not my job to teach, but I think it is. I think it's certainly our job to make sure that we're all getting that seat at the table. We're all getting brought up to some sort of level. We're all getting the opportunities to be able to shine, right? Because everyone's different. Everyone has different backgrounds. Everyone might have had different opportunities. But if you as a leader, if you as a thought leader, if you as a supervisor have an opportunity to give someone who hasn't had maybe a certain opportunity that their peers have, that's an instrument that you have in your wheelhouse, a tool that you have to bring people up to a more level playing field, so that you're building a better Navy, a better DoD, a better government, wherever it is you work.
Pay inventories also work well too. So you would go through every single person who has that position, and you would vet what their credentials are, and you would see, what the rationale is for their pay rate versus the rationale for someone else's pay rate. And based on what your findings are, you would, address it. And hopefully you address it the right way.
Well, that's awesome, because I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, I think we did the same thing. I think from the beginning, we, I know from a practical standpoint, even at my current company, from the beginning, right, you have clear definitions of one, outside of culture, just mechanically speaking, we had clear definitions of levels, right? And always a lot of debate. It's always hard to judge, right? Subjective skill sets, et cetera, are subjective, and there can be bias within those discussions, of course, right? No matter how clear you might be in your definitions. So I think we tried to account for that, both in terms of the definitions, but then the interpretation of the definition and the application to each individual, which are three different things, by the way, right? One, writing a definition. The interpretation can be, all of us can read the same paragraph, interpret it differently, right? And then third, application to each person can have an inherent bias also built in. So how do you account for those three things? I think that's something that, again, I spent, I'm not a HR person, I'm not a talent, but I built my whole company based on talent and culture. We were in Harvard Business Review for it. It's something that is, I feel like, the world, ultimately, what is it about? It's about people. That's the only reason we're here, right? So everything we do in life every day is about people, right? It's nothing else, right? It's about, us staying healthy, taking care of our families, and taking care of all those people that we, touch in some way. So I think we need to do more as people to just kind of think about these things. So I think, like, if I am looking at those pay systems, that's what I would suggest to people is, like, I think a lot of people do put thought and like equalize it, but then the application of it fails, right? It's same thing as policy, right? We design a lot of policies that have some good intent behind them, but the execution of the policy fails. Every day we can probably all come up with 1,000 examples of that, right? So it's the same exact thing, right? So I think we just have to be mindful that the application is the same as the intent. So.
Yeah, and I think and part of this too is when I think about back to when I had my TED talk, I talked about having the conversations, and I think a lot of organizations have been having them. But what about, and this is what I was afraid of when I talking is like, how do we continue those conversations? And so another person who did a TED talk with our with DAU with us last year was about having that safe place. Retired Colonel, Air Force Colonel Dee Halfhill, and creating that safe place. I see a question that says, what if someone's not making it a priority and is resistant or thinks there's no issue? I think, Micheal, you showed there, those statistics are pretty impactful to the different different Asian cultures. And so, like, I think as long as there's stats there, you have proof that these conversations need to continue. So, like, from your perspective, how can people continue these conversations? Because the issue is there.
Well, this is it. We're here. We're doing the work. And it's not gonna be quick. This is a long-term, ongoing thing that we all have to, stay engaged in. In terms of kind of like, hard answers, like what can we do right now? Trusted Workforce 2.0 is out there. Senator Mark Warner is hot on this, and he's pushing OPM to get this done. Our security clearance procedures are a relic of post-World War II. We haven't updated our security clearance procedures in over half a century. The world's a different place now. With Russia and China rising as it is and as growing its threat, there are going to be Russian Americans and Chinese Americans as well in the federal government who need these updated policies, as Raj was saying. The work starts here, but then to implement the policy, we have to be very, very cognizant about what's going into that. So I commend Senator Warner for writing shotgun on this and pushing this thing through. And we'll be watching that closely as well. And the other thing I wanted to say is, we all have implicit bias, right? All of us. I have implicit bias. I can't get away from it. But I don't take it personally. That's the beauty of America. We're here. We have this opportunity to connect. We have made this promise to our citizens that I think is probably one of the greatest promises ever in the world, is that we're all equal and we all have the equal opportunity. And that's why I love this country, and that's why I love this work. And I appreciate everything everyone's doing to bring people together. So yeah, this is it. Let's just keep working and let's keep connecting.
Yeah, are there any books that you guys would recommend? You can drop it in the chat. I see someone put, are there any books for recognizing unconscious bias? I think when I was preparing my TED Talk, I talked about that heavily to my experiences walking down the Pentagon halls when it was my first time. It was so exciting because literally the whole place is like a museum, and I love museums. And I realized I walked down the halls of the CNO, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and my coworker was showing me around, and I noticed that there were no people of color on those walls. And when we were talking about, when I was talking about my recruitment efforts and like going to HBCUs and going to a Society for Hispanic Engineers, for a Society for Asian Engineers, it was Society of Women Engineers, and he asked like, why is stuff like that important to you? He was really curious. And I told him, I said, hey, when we walked down those halls at the Pentagon, did you notice that there was nobody on the walls that looked like me? And he said, no, actually I didn't. And I said, that's the reason. I said, like, the fact is that like you had no idea, it didn't stand out because that was your normal. But for me, my normal is seeing that, but I also know when something representation is not there. So I love the fact that we had the first Air Force Colonel General Charles Q. Brown had got inducted and is the first African American in that position and across all military boards. So that was amazing. But yeah, if you guys have any books, you guys can drop those in there too.
Hey, Ashley.
And then I just like to ask like one.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Raj.
No, I think one thing I was just going to add an additional pieces. I think there is a lot of now focus, and rightfully so, around diversity and inclusion, and I think we need to look at it the right way, like we've discussed. I think I'm focused. For instance, I work. My main kind of the platform I'm building globally is about bringing, companies into government and kind of leading, et cetera. But I've kind of also worked on the issue of supplier diversity with Fortune companies before, as well as kind of now, starting to work with government. For instance, we had a women-led tech accelerator just announced. We're going to announce 10 amazing women-led companies. It's in partnership with a venture fund. But reason I say all of that is I think when we're thinking about this, we think about the context of also, our customers, obviously, and communities that we're in, right? That's really important. What is the diversity and makeup of our customer base? And I think, hopefully companies aren't just making decisions based on that. It's inherently, but I think the supplier piece specifically is an extension of our organization, right? It's like we have a certain number of people that work with us, and then we have suppliers. And in many cases, in case of government, it's just like more than half, maybe, right? If you added up all the people that work, in service of government, outside of government, right? So I think the supplier diversity piece is important from a standpoint of not just, looking at, hey, is it a minority-owned company, right? But I think there's a way to really the best companies in the world. I've kind of studied this before. I've kind of met, with many companies that are part of this $1 billion roundtable that are leading companies. But I think there's a certain set of practices they also put in place to make sure their supply chain partners have good practices, right? And so I that's a whole other topic. But I just want to kind of also just stress that, because I think you can parlay that all the way. If half of your money is being spent outside, right, then I think it is an important thing to think about. So.
Yes,
Actually, there's a question in the question and answer that I think is really interesting. If I can address it. So it says, based on American history, is diversity and inclusiveness, sorry about that, my tongue wants to move faster than my mouth, more of an issue in America? Do these same issues present itself in other countries? Does globalization of American culture teach exclusivity stereotypes to some and make it to some point and make it the norm? So I know that, and for anybody who has any global experience, is it's not so much a racial or a sexual orientation or anything like those specific issues that we have here in the United States. And in fact, in the United States, diversity and inclusion is regional, because the Appalachian diversity is different than New York diversity, you know, and Southern diversity and all that kind of stuff. So we have to be careful when we're thinking about diversity and inclusion. But when we're looking globally, we have to be aware that, and this is that piece that you added at the end, attendee, about American culture. We tend to project that onto other countries, and everybody's diversity is different. Everyone's diversity is different. In America, we have had historically strict laws to restrict people based on these physical characteristics. And so this is why a lot of the laws that we have now, why diversity and inclusion is vastly, very, very important right now, because historically those laws, and a lot of them, they're remaining. The effects are still continuing with us today. So that's why diversity and inclusion is so important right now. In other countries, is a lot of ethnic variances. There may be people with religious variances. And so this is where we find some of those challenges. But when we look at most non-European countries, that's what we're seeing. When we're looking at most, like America, Europe, France, things of those natures, it's really where race, a lot of, colonial countries. So, those are the variances. Diversity and equity and inclusion is important all over, but they vary based on the region, the country that you're in, and their history.
I mean, we have a lot of that, and also Shidale in India, for instance.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I was born there, came here, and I think, there's without, I won't make any controversial statements here. But,
we know where you're going. We got it.
No, but I think more to stick to the question here. Yeah, there are each society has, there's a lot of history in every culture, right? And I do think that's another recognition, I would say, that, I think like America is not that abnormal from that standpoint. I go to a country like India, where I was born. There's a huge Muslim Hindu divide, huge, right? And then there's also a caste system, right? Where historically, culturally, over history, centuries, there's like 4 castes, right? And there's the untouchables who, to this day, right? There are women that are beaten up and burnt because they come from, that culture. And it's bothers me to this day that those things happen, right? So I think so I think when we think about these issues, I think the point is we're not that abnormal. I think there are things, of course, those extremes need to be eliminated, destroyed. Those people need to be put in jail, all of that, right? But also I think we need to take historical context into, when we go into rural neighborhoods. I'm working with the rural chambers of commerce now also. I want to understand better, like if you grew up in a rural town, right? And you have never seen, I've been to many, and like if you've never been outside 20 miles of where you grew up, and you really didn't get to see much more than that, that's what right? Now, if we start to impose a lot of change there, it's the same as any one of us. When we get a lot of change imposed on us, no matter where we come from, I think some of us are more open to that change, others aren't, right? And aren't able to dig that. I think that's part of the issue. The world is changing at a pace that human behavior and human emotions can't keep up with, right? I'm going to go do a psychology degree soon. That's what I want to do. But I do think that the pace of change, right, whether it's technology and migration and all of these things, the pace of change taking place is not compatible with the change and the ability of human beings to kind of keep pace with. So that's what, partly we need to account for. Again, I'm not making excuses for anything. I think, but I do think those things are helpful to understand when we're thinking about these issues.
Can I jump in? I wanted to So, Raj, thank you so much for that, and thank you for your vulnerability and sending you love and blessings. I really, really appreciate that, because I think there's not enough of that in the workplace and in our world. But I did also want to address. There's a third question: does the globalization of American culture teach exclusivity and stereotypes to some point and make it the norm? Mm-hmm. When I was growing up as a kid, my grandma from Taiwan immigrated to the United States, and she loved to use Darky toothpaste. Okay, and for those of you who aren't aware of this, this was a huge toothpaste brand in Taiwan, and it was this caricature of a man in blackface. And they got that, the marketers in Taiwan, China got that image from America. What we do here, the world is watching us. So what we do here has global impact. So to answer that third question, absolutely, which is why it's so important that we work so hard to get this right, because it's not just this country, it's other countries are looking to us for leadership as well. So I just wanted to put that out there and address that third question.
Yeah, thank you guys. And as I bring this to a close too, because I like to, I always like tie it in, like, guys, like these conversations, we got to keep continuing it. Like wherever you're in your workplace, like, all the speakers here put their LinkedIn, and I'll send out their information after this event. But like continue to have those conversations. And if you see them in your organization starting to die down, start them up again. Sometimes it's like we always wait for the opportunity instead of making the opportunity, taking the opportunity. And now that things are virtual, like what Ryan was doing, start having those coffee days, those virtual coffee dates, those virtual happy hours, because people still want to be connected, people still want to be included. And in this community now with more disconnectedness, because we're always glued to the TV, glued to our phones, but not actually connecting with people, I implore you guys, like, the people here, the ones here that are in this quote unquote church of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are the ones that will change the masses. We are the ones that will make sure that these topics continue to happen even after they're an afterthought. I mean, like I said, lots of organizations are making this a priority. The Department of Defense certainly is doing it. A lot of organizations are certainly doing it, but there are some that still need to hear these. So continue to share the message, share your stories, and always look for opportunities to learn. Always look for opportunities to show empathy. Thank you, Raj, like for showing that the vulnerability, because that is what drives change. That is what drives that's the powerful aspect of the change. It is like laying that foundation, and if nobody's doing it, guys, you guys are it. So I want to thank you guys. Speakers, thank you. You're phenomenal. I appreciate you guys coming. I love this conversation. And I wish I could do series of these all the time, but we're going to finish them on LinkedIn. We're going to finish them on Twitter and Facebook. So I want to appreciate you guys and thank you guys for coming so much. Like the government can't send out gifts like that, but all my loves and virtual hugs are the gifts right now.
That's amazing.
Virtual hugs.
Hey, Ashley, we got to do this conversation on Clubhouse. I'm gonna put, and I think we'll get 8,000 people in that room. So. Let's
do it. So we'll circle back and get it started on Clubhouse, because we need the tools. We need support. Honestly, a lot of times it's not even just having the tools, but having someone that's going to support you. Because I might have Dr. Seale's in California supporting, and I think Michael, you're in Florida supporting, but also having the support locally. So thank you guys. We're going to take this. I like that. Let's see, maybe NavalX Clubhouse. I'm going to talk to Matt about that. All right. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you, everyone.